The following is a production of Notch 6 Media.
It's the Notch 6 online podcast, episode number 52. In this episode, O-Gauge media juggernaut Eric Siegel of ericstrains.com joins me to discuss his history in the hobby, his current layout, some of his favorite scenery techniques, and so much more. It's all ahead on this episode of Notch 6.
This is the Notch 6 online podcast. Notch 6 is the podcast dedicated to O-Gauge trains. Whether you're collecting, operating, or just getting started, Notch 6 is your home for O-Gauge news, events, and interviews. Now here is your host, Derek Thomas.
Well, welcome into another episode of Notch 6, brought to you each and every month by the fine folks at trains.com. That's trains spelled with a Z. You know, I went over to trains.com this morning and looked at the auction section. There's over 22 pages of modern O-Gauge listings right now up for auction. And that's just the modern listings. That doesn't include HO, G-scale, standard gauge, pre-war, post-war. Yeah, they've got a little bit of everything. That's trains.com, a very, very dangerous place if you like O-Gauge trains for your wallet. I hope you'll check them out. Thanks so much to Scott and Melinda Griggs, as always, for being such a big supporter of this show. Well, it's episode 52. It's March, and it's hard to believe that spring is pretty much here. In Indiana, the weather is warming up, and could not be more excited about that. Spring York just around the corner here. I'm not going to be going to Spring York this time around, which is not too unusual for me, but it seems like I'm making the trip out to York more and more often. We'll definitely be out there in the fall, but we're not going to go out this spring. We've got a couple of other things in the pipeline that are going to take some precedence over that, and so we're going to save our York trip for this fall. But if there's any big news to cover, you can be assured that we will cover it. We'll let you know when we know something. And now I get to do something that I'm really excited to do. I've never given away anything before on this show, and we're going to give something away. For the last 3 months, I've been asking very kindly, and you guys have been responding to my request to leave a review on iTunes for the Notch 6 podcast. And I appreciate everybody who's left a review so far. That really helps the show in the ratings, and it does get the show out there to more people. So if your iTunes username is Gary72, you need to email me at notch6, that's Notchsix, 6 spelled out, notch6@gmail.com, and I'm going to send you some goodies out of the Madison poster closet. Some interesting things tucked away in there. And so we're going to do this giveaway again. We'll give you guys a couple of more months. Those who missed out the first time, go leave me a review on iTunes under the Notch 6 podcast. And again, a few months down the road, I'll select another winner, and we'll send another lucky person some stuff out of the Madison poster closet. All right, we're going to dig right into today's interview with Eric Siegel of ericstrains.com. If you don't know Eric, you should know Eric. He's established one of the most successful YouTube channels related to O-Gauge trains. He has an incredible layout. He has some fantastic scenery skills and is just a very passionate guy about O-Gauge trains. And he's introducing a new generation to O-Gauge trains through his work on social media. So here comes my interview with Eric Siegel of ericstrains.com on Notch 6.
The LCCA invites you to attend their 45th annual convention July 20th through the 25th in Danvers, Massachusetts. If you like Lionel Trains, LCCA commemorative products, real trains, and want to tour the Boston area, you won't want to miss this spectacular event. We have great tours scheduled for the whole family to enjoy. Don't delay, join the club and reserve your spot today.
This is Notch 6, your first source for breaking news and in-depth interviews in the world of O-Gauge.
Welcome back to the Notch 6 online podcast. I'm really excited to have with me today Eric Siegel of ericstrains.com. Eric, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be on the show. Really enjoy your podcast, and I've been looking forward to doing this for a while. I think we've been playing tag for a while,
We
to try
have
to get it
been.
done.
Yeah, and the cool thing is we are both fans of each other's work. You know, I love what you're doing in the YouTube and the Facebook space, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. And I appreciate the compliment coming from you. And like I said, you know, the bottom line is it's really about taking the world of O-gauge trains and bringing it to a different market. And we'll touch on that here in a little bit. The first thing I ask everybody, and this is just to establish kind of a baseline here, give me a brief background about how you got into O-gauge trains and walk me through this process of how we got to where we're at now.
Well, I think it's probably a fairly similar story to other people. You know, you get to, I was into trains when I was a kid, and although it was a little bit different, and then I never really had any O-gauge trains when I was a small kid. The way it happened was that I had my dad had a set when he was a kid, and when I was growing up, he would always tell me about this set he had, but I never saw it. It was packed away at his parents' house, and then he just kind of built it up as this legendary post-war set that he had. And then when he was about when I was about 13, his parents died. And so we had to go clean out their house. And, you know, all the adults were, you know, getting all the silverware and furniture and all that stuff. And of course, being 13, I didn't care about that. But I did want to find this set that my dad had talked about all these years. And so I went in the basement, went in the storage room, and found his old set in a couple boxes. And you could tell they had been thrown there by a mom or someone other than my dad, because they were thrown into the box, literally. And so I took them home and started working on them. And so I was 13, 14 when that happened. So, you know, a lot of kids have stories of getting into trains when they were 5 or 6. But for me, it really didn't happen until I was 13 or 14. And I brought them home, and I bought myself a Greenberg's guide to the post-war trains, and started working on rewiring them and replacing parts that needed replacing, and had a lot of fun with it all the way up until, you know, I went to college when I was 18. And, you know, at the same time when I was working on the trains, I was into music, and I had a band, and so I went to college and did the music thing and did the school thing and the girl thing, and the trains took a back seat until I was, you know, like most people, until I was grown up, so to speak. and I had my own kid, and he was, you know, at that time when he was 4 years old or so, he really liked trains. He doesn't like trains now. He's an athlete now, but it would figure, you know, my own kid, you know, he doesn't want to have anything to do with them. He's all about sports, but that's okay, you know. But so when he was around, I said, you know, I've got all these old trains at my dad's house. Let me go get them. And I went and picked them up, and we had a big loft apartment in downtown Atlanta. And so we set them up in the apartment. And, you know, these were all post-war trains, you know, 027. I didn't even know that scale trains existed at this point, you know. And we set up a layout in my apartment, and you know, I got on eBay, and I was like, oh, they're still making these things. And I started buying them, you know, like a kid in a candy store. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, I started buying from the local train store. And then, you know, the big day, the big magical day happened when I went over to Legacy Station, and he showed me, this was in about 2004 or 2005. And he showed me an MTH scale Norfolk Southern -9 with Proto Sound 2, and I was just blown away. And I said, well, I didn't even know that they made scale stuff like this. And so I sort of put away the 027 trains and started doing the scale trains, and then started building up a fleet of scale trains, mainly MTH at that point. And then we bought this house that I'm in now, where I have the layout. And I started building the layout, and eventually, once I wasn't into TMCC engines until Legacy came out. And once Legacy came out, I really liked the Legacy system. and I started buying the legacy trains and working on this layout here, and then at some point when I was building the layout here, I started doing videos on YouTube, and really it was just, like most people, it was just sort of for fun, just sort of posting the videos of, the first ones I didn't even talk, I just ran the trains, and then slowly I started doing, videos where I talked, and people seemed to like them, and I've been making them ever since, and so that sort of brings us to where we are right now, where now I've got over 200 videos, and people seem to really like them, so I keep making them.
I think the funny thing is, and we'll dive in on the YouTube on this question. I think you're being a little bit modest. Most of the reason people are familiar with your work is the YouTube channel Eric's Trains. So I went and looked at the specs last night. The YouTube channel is just short of 14,800 subscribers,
Yep.
and over the last almost 8 years, you've had 7.5 million views. What inspired you to say, okay, I'm going to start making train videos? And then what kind of happened when you realized, oh, wait, these are actually getting some attention?
Well, like I said, I started it just for fun. I really don't know the original inspiration. I know I saw people had train videos on YouTube, and I said, well, I'll post a couple of videos of, this is when I didn't even have any scenery yet. I just had plywood. And I started posting some of those, and I got a few followers, and people seemed to like them. And then I said, okay, well, let me try doing, let me try doing a video where I'm talking, and explaining stuff. And so I think really, now that I think about it, maybe the inspiration was that I was building this huge layout, and I thought to myself, I think there's a lot of people who wonder how you get started building a layout, and I said, well, maybe I can, as I'm building the layout, do these videos and kind of just show people how it's done, just to let them know that it's not as hard as you think. You just have to start at one place and just keep going, and eventually you'll have a layout. And so that, I think that might have been the original inspiration.
Let's talk about this layout for a second, because I think that's one of the big draws of your videos and your Facebook pages. You've built this incredible layout, the Appalachian Western. Mm-hmm. Give me some of the specs on this layout: size, track system, power supplies. What makes this thing tick, and what's this layout all about?
Well, the original inspiration was, I think, similar to most people, growing up. Most of my, the first layout I had when I was a kid was small. It was, like 8 by 16. And then the layout I had when I had my apartment, my loft apartment, was, 8 by 12 or something. And so, like most people, I said, man, one of these days I want to build a big old layout, and it came to the point where we bought a house, and we had the space. And ironically, the funny thing is that as big as this layout is, it's actually smaller than what I wanted, because there was a house that we almost bought that had a basement that was about twice the size of the one I have now.
Oh, wow.
And but now that I think about it, that might have been bigger, more than I could handle. So it's probably a good thing that I got this. But we got this house, and I said, okay, I'm gonna build the layout with the space I have. It was a finished basement, so I said, well, it would be great if it had been unfinished, so I wouldn't have to deal with walls and stuff. But it was finished, and so I asked my wife. I said, well, is it okay if I take up the whole basement, and is it okay if I go through the walls with the trains? And she said, yeah, it's okay. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to use every room in this basement, and I'll just go right through the walls like they're not there. And so then I started planning it. And I guess the original, the idea was I wanted to have a contemporary layout. A lot of the layouts that I had seen in magazines and around here, were steam era layouts where they were kind of set in the 1940s or 1950s, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But, growing up, I was a kid in the 80s, and we didn't see steam trains. We saw Conrail and Union Pacific and stuff like that, and it was all diesels, and mainly, here in Georgia at least, it was all freight trains. I mean, a passenger train was a real rarity. I mean, you had to go downtown if you wanted to see an Amtrak train or something. So that was what I knew was modern trains. And so, well, I want this to be a modern layout, and I'm going to have. And originally, I had no steam engines at all. I had all diesels, and I said, this is going to be modern, all diesels, no steam, nothing. And so that's what I modeled it as, and it still is a modern themed layout. But of course, as the years progressed, I sort of caved in and started getting steam engines, and so now I have a ton of steam engines as well. And the way I just rationalize it, I say, well, they're excursion trains on my layout. You know, it's a modern layout, but I'm just running excursion steam trains, I guess. But
sure.
But I, you know, so I wanted it to be a modern themed layout, and I wanted it to be centered mainly in the southeast part of the country where I live.
Right.
And so that was the theme I wanted to go for. But then I had a room in the back, and so I decided to make that a Colorado themed room, which didn't happen. It didn't happen until I went to Colorado with my wife to go backpacking, and I said, well, I really like this, so I'm going to make one room Colorado. And that way, you know, it'll make the trains seem like they're kind of going somewhere, so they're not all stuck in the southeast. You know, cool. I can kind of pretend like they're going out west somewhere and then coming back. And so that was the theme that I started with, and then just kind of built it up from there. It's hard to measure the layout because it's not all in one room. You know, usually when you see articles, you see it's like, oh, it's 20 by 40 or 10 by 20. But since it's in different rooms, I measure it in square feet, and it's about 500 square feet. And
okay.
So it's actually, you know, even though it seems really big, it's actually a little smaller than it is. It just seems bigger than it is because it goes through multiple rooms. But if you were to put it all together, you know, it's big, but it's certainly not, you know, record-setting big or anything like that.
Right.
It's just kind of the illusion. But that's kind of the fun thing about this hobby is a lot of it is illusion. You know, giving the impression of something when it's not even there. You know, you see a lot of modelers using the force perspective on their layouts, and a lot of people use mirrors and stuff like that just to make the layout look bigger than it is. And so that's the neat thing about this layout is that it's really not that big, but it looks big because it goes through 4 different rooms. And so people say, wow, my God, this is huge, but it really isn't. So, you know, in terms of specs, I guess, I mean, do you want to know like the layout height and stuff like that?
We don't need to get that specific, but I'm just curious what you're using for track system and what you're using to power this monster too.
Oh, okay. Yeah. The track on the layout is almost all Atlas. And the reason it's Atlas is because that's what I was introduced to when I started getting into the scale trains over at Legacy Station. They said, here's Atlas track. This is really good. Try this. And I liked it. And so that's what I went with. So it's all Atlas track and switches, although I have installed a couple Ross switches over the years, and I really like those. And so I think over the years, as the Atlas switches give out or need to be replaced, I may be replacing those with Ross because I really like the way the Ross ones work.
What are you using for power on this layout?
The power is actually pretty simple. I've got the layout split into 4 power districts, and each power district is powered by a Lionel Powerhouse 180 brick.
Wow, so it's only 4 180 bricks to do the entire layout?
Yeah, I may split that into 5 at some point because there's, especially in the main room, the lower level of the main room is on 1 brick, and I'm thinking of splitting that into 2 bricks, just not really because of any problems, but just because of it'll be nice, you know, when I have an open house, people come see the layout. You know, if there's a derailment on one section of the bottom level and it shorts out, it would be nice to have the rest of the bottom level keep working.
Right.
So that's the reason for that. But as far as functionality works, the 180 bricks work fine. I've never had any problems with them.
Okay.
I take that back. If there are problems sometimes if you're running like 4 engines and then 10 passenger cars behind it, and all the passenger cars have those incandescents.
Yeah.
Then you can run into a problem sometimes, and for that reason, that's why I've been slowly replacing all my passenger car lights with LEDs, because they're just so much more efficient. But as far as functionality, they work great. And I think a lot of people, when they first come into the hobby, they think, well, if I have, for the power of my layout, I have to buy a big old ZW or a Z4000 or something like that, and I'm always telling them, if you're only running in command control like I am, you don't need that throttle knob. All you need is the raw power.
Right.
And so for that reason, that's why I for the track, all I use are the bricks, because it's just 18 volts constant. And you don't have, it's either on or off. You don't have to worry about that throttle knob.
And more often than not, you're going to run out of amps before you're going to run out of watts.
Right.
And that I think is something that a lot of people don't understand. You're gonna run out of the amps from motors and lights before you're going to run out of the watts on those bricks.
Yeah, the amps are the thing you have to watch. The watts are fine. It's like you said, it's the amps that are the problem. That's the exact reason why I've been putting LEDs in all my passenger cars, because it's those amps that really drive it up. And when you can take, I have a Norfolk, the MTH Norfolk Southern office car special, and it's got 10 passenger cars, and it came with the incandescent lights, and I think with the incandescent lights in all 10 passenger cars, I think it pulled like 4 or 5 amps. It was crazy, and you've got 4 or 5 amps just for the passenger cars plus the engines. You're right up there at 8, 9 amps before too long. And so I replaced them all with LEDs, and now those same 10 passenger cars pull less than 1 amp. So
wow.
So changing out to LEDs is a big deal. And I'm really glad to see that Lionel is finally starting to put LEDs in the cars at the factory.
Yeah.
That's huge. And I hope MTH does that. I don't think, MTH is a little more conservative when it comes to changing stuff, and so I think they probably got a really good deal on the incandescent lights, and so they're probably going to keep those for a while. But hopefully, eventually, they'll move to LEDs too. I know Atlas has. When you can get LEDs in the passenger cars at the factory, that's a big deal, and it really saves a lot of time and effort, and it saves a lot of amps on your layout.
Right. And just to kind of put it in perspective, when he's talking about, 8, 9 amps for a single train, most of the 180 bricks, you're going to pop a breaker at 18 to 20 amps. And so you're using half the amperage of your brick, just on one set. So that kind of puts it in perspective about, how much, those incandescent lights are taking, from your power supply when it's a large train like that.
Yeah. It's all about the amps, and I don't want to get too much into, electric theory and stuff like that. But it's kind of funny. You learn so much stuff, before I started building this layout, I didn't really have the slightest idea what amps were, but you start building a layout of this size and it becomes a big thing.
Right.
Especially when you're having an open house where you're running 4 trains and 2 of those trains are passenger trains, it becomes a big deal, and like it or not, you have to learn about the amps.
I think that brings us to an interesting point about a lot of building a big layout, or any layout for that matter, is learning through our failures. I guess I want to call it, because you and I were having a discussion before we went on the air that, we learn because of our screw ups, and there's no such thing as a perfect layout. Can you kind of give some examples of things you've had to go back and redo just because it didn't work out the first time?
Yeah. It's that, it's one of those things, there's all those sayings in life, like a stitch in time saves 9, and you get what you pay for. All these sayings that you heard growing up, they're there for a reason. And, when it comes to, a layout, just like life, sometimes you can learn more from a failure than you can from success. And failure is a crucial ingredient in building a layout, because that's how you learn. I mean, all of this stuff on this layout. I mean, people see this layout and they say, "Wow, how long did it take you to do this? How did you learn to do this?" And I tell them, I had never done anything like this before this layout, ever. My last layout before this layout was a post-war style layout with plaster cloth on chicken wire, and yeah, I had to learn all of this stuff for this layout. And the best learning opportunities are failure. And so, yeah, I mean, for the track work, I mean, I learned a lot of lessons with the track work. When I built this layout, I used the old recommended method where they say, "Oh, you should put a power feeder every few feet on your layout." And so I ran a bus wire, and then I did a power feed to the track every every about 6 feet or so. And what I later learned was that actually in the command control world, that can sometimes cause you more harm than good. Because when you get all those power feed wires all over the place, it can create some interference, some signal interference. And so actually what I ended up going back and doing was cutting a lot of those feeder wires to get better performance out of the legacy and especially the MTH system, because they really don't need that. In the old days, when you just had a transformer, like back in the 1950s, you wanted, a power feed every few feet. But nowadays, I think, it's really not that needed as much. You only need a few feeders on a track versus every few feet. And I think and what I found was that it was actually a little bit too much, because the digital systems are such that they really don't need that many power feeds. I'm sure there's probably some people that would disagree with that, but that's been my experience. And I had to go under the table and start cutting these wires that I had painstakingly installed. And that's just one of those things where you think you're doing something right, and then you go back and you have to fix it, or the scenery. People remark about how the rock scenery looks so nice, but it didn't. I probably did 4 or 5 different tries before I got it the way I wanted it. You have to. I mean, you're going to make some mistakes, and you just have to roll with it. And when you make a mistake, you learn from it and go back and do it again. And that's how it's done. It's not. It doesn't happen overnight. It's sort of a learning process, and along the way, you're going to have a lot of failures. But those failures are such a good thing. I mean, they kind of stink when they happen. You kind of sigh and say, "Oh gosh, now I got to go back and redo that." But in the end, you're better for it. I mean, another thing I did, a big mistake I made on this layout was that when I first built this layout, all I had were diesel engines, and I didn't have any steam engines. And so I built the tunnels, especially in the main room, for diesels. And I made sure the clearance was good for diesel engines. Well, then I started getting steam engines and big articulated steam engines. And lo and behold, I found that these tunnels were too narrow. The tunnel portals were too narrow. The tunnel walls were too close to the track. And I was having all sorts of problems. And that's an issue that haunts me to this day. And I'm having to go back and fix all those tunnels, which is a giant pain in the butt. But I'm having to go through there and fix all those things because, I didn't have the foresight when I first built the tunnels to say, oh, maybe one day I'll get a steam engine, So, hindsight's always 20/20. And you look back and you say, oh, man, I should have done it this way, But that's how you learn. And so the next layout that I build at some point in the future, now I know when I do the tunnels, well, I better make extra sure. I better give about twice as much clearance as I think I need, because otherwise, you're going to have to go back and fix it. So you learn so much, and you fix things and you go back, and it's by no means ever a smooth and error-free process. I mean, I don't care. I mean, we said this before the interview, I don't care how big or nice the layout is or where it is in the world. There's no such thing as a perfect layout, and every layout has its problems. And even this layout, there's still lots of problems that are there because I didn't do it right when I first started. And you take notes and you say, okay, next time don't do this, or next time do this, and that's how it works.
Right. Let's talk a little bit more about the scenery on the layout. Your scenery is really well thought out and really well planned out, at least from what we've seen from the videos and the Facebook page. Where do you learn your scenery techniques? Who inspires you, and what are you using to learn from?
My main inspiration, before I did this layout, I was of the plaster cloth on chicken wire school. And when I started this layout, I really didn't know how I was going to do this scenery. I thought I would just do it the same way I always had with plaster cloth. And then the main inspiration was I went over to see the layout of a friend of mine who when I got back into the hobby, I joined a club. And one of the members named Bill Dissinger, I went over to his house, and he has a fantastic layout. It's about 20 minutes away from me. And I was blown away by his layout and the way he did his scenery. And so I took note of everything he did. And he had said, for the rocks, I use these latex rock molds and stuff like that. And so I went home and I got on the internet. I said, latex rock molds. And I put it in Google, and I pulled up the Bragdon Enterprises website. And they're the people that make all of these wonderful rock molds. And I said, okay, well, here's the rock molds. I have no idea how this works. But thankfully, on their website, they had a DVD that you could buy that showed you how to do it. And so I bought the DVD. I got 2 or 3 rock molds and all the materials they recommended, and I bought the DVD, and I played it, and I watched it, and I watched it again, and I watched it again, and then I basically started doing their process for the rocks on the layout and the rocks in the mountains. And I was really, really happy with the outcome. And then eventually, I started tweaking their methods, to kind of get my own, as anyone does, you kind of start tweaking it to your own needs. But, and that's when I got these really nice rocks on the layout that I was really happy about. And I still remember the first time I got it right. And I brought my wife downstairs and I said, look at these rocks. Look how great they look. Because I'd never seen, before I saw my friend Bill's layout, I had never seen rocks like that on a layout. I'd seen people who carved them out from foam or plaster or something like that. And they look fine. I don't have anything against those. But these rocks on Bill's layout were just, the crevices and the color variations were just so incredible. And when I finally got it right, when I was doing it, I was so thrilled, and I couldn't believe, and it's one of those things, one of the many things, and I'll probably mention it again in this video, where, you have these moments when you're building a layout where you make something and it's better than you ever thought it could be, and you can kind of stand back and look at it and say, wow, I can't believe that I made this. Because I'm not really an artist or anything. I can't paint to save my life. But you take a step back and you look at this rock face that you just made, and it's kind of the reward you give to yourself. You're able to step back a little bit and say, oh my God, I can't believe that I made this. And you look at it and you're kind of shocked that you made something like this that you never made before. And that was a really cool time when that happened with especially with the rocks on the layout. And it's the same thing with the salt weathering on the the steel trestle. And I think you wanted to talk about the salt weathering.
Yeah,
too.
Let's talk about that for a little bit, because this is one of my favorite techniques that you use. Yeah. And the way it turned out on the bridge is just incredible. So kind of explain what salt weathering is to the listeners, and give us a brief overview. And then I know you've got a video that we can direct the listeners to too, that'll show them basically how the entire thing works from start to finish.
Yeah. Salt weathering is I'm sorry to say I didn't invent it. I didn't invent any of the techniques that I use. They're all heisted from other people. But the salt weathering, basically what you do is you you take a surface and you put a coat of paint on it. You put a rust color down first. So for me, I use a color that I can buy at Home Depot that's made by Rust. I think it's made by Rust-Oleum, and it's called a camouflage brown. And so you put that down first. And so for the bridge, for example, I painted it brown. So it was this rust brown color. And then once that brown is dry, you take sea salt, really coarse sea salt. You don't want fine salt, but coarse sea salt. And you spray water on the bridge, and you drop the salt on there. And the water helps the salt stick to the bridge or train or whatever it is you're weathering. And you just kind of clump it on and drop that salt on there and get it all caked on there. And then you wait for the water to evaporate. And once the water is evaporated, you've just got this dry salt crusted onto your structure. And then what you do is you take the final color that you want the item to be. So for the bridge, it was green. And you spray the green over the salt and over the structure. And then once the green paint is dry, you then come by with your hands and you start flicking off the sea salt. And so the result is that you get this, you get these patches in the green where you can see through to the brown underneath. And so it gives the appearance of paint that has, flaked off over the years, and rust that has worked its way through the paint on the bridge or the train or whatever you're doing. And the effect is just amazing. And again, that's one of those things where you do it and you stand back and you say, wow, I can't believe I just did this, and it looked so great. And all it is just, you're basically using the salt between two layers of paint. And the real beauty of the salt is that the salt is coarse and random. And so it gives you this really irregular pattern of flaked off paint. And it's really astounding.
It's impressive. You've got a whole video on doing salt weathering on your YouTube channel. Do you remember what episode that is?
I want to say it's episode 37.
It's either 37 or 38. I think it may be 8. I will make sure we get it put in the show notes with a link to the episode. That way, if you want to see salt weathering in action, it really is a neat technique. And like Eric said, you can do it on metal. You can do it on plastic. It's a technique that can be used on a lot of different things on your layout. Let's switch back to the social media aspect of what you do here for a little bit. One of the things that I love is that you've embraced a lot of mainstream social media, Facebook, YouTube, Ustream. You're using webcams. It's a lot of social media that, to be honest, the hobby has been averse to for a long time. It seems like, this hobby runs about 10, 15 years behind where everybody else is. But, you just stepped up to the plate and have gone and used these mainstream social media channels. Why do you think it's important to use these channels as opposed to, doing this kind of work in magazines and forums and things like that?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. The magazines and forums and, and the train shows are really a really good thing. But the problem is that, there's limited exposure, especially for newcomers to the hobby. And I'm talking about small kids, the way I see it is that, in the heyday of model trains, like in the 1950s, for O-gauge trains at least, in the post-war period, Lionel was doing great. And the reason they were doing great was because, there was a lot of exposure. Kids, trains back then were kind of like an Xbox now. Every kid had one. And the problem, but then there's, but the problem is that, like, when people like me, when I was a kid, in the 80s, there really wasn't that kind of exposure. for trains. I mean, in order for a kid, when I was a kid, in order for a kid to get into trains, you really had to have a parent that was in the hobby, because you certainly weren't going to have the exposure in the real world unless you lived, maybe in the Northeast Corridor or something. You really weren't going to see a lot of passenger trains. You might see some freight trains, but they certainly weren't going to be popular toys. So unless you had a parent that was getting you into the hobby, there was really no way to get into it, and so that's why, those years were kind of, I think, a lot more lean for the hobby, because there were not a lot of kids getting into it. Nowadays, the internet's here, and that's a great thing for the hobby, but not because, I think, when people think of the internet and trains, a lot of people might think, well, it's great for buying and selling trains, which it is, but for me, the real beauty of the internet is that, and the social media, is exposure. There's a whole generation of kids now that are being exposed to model trains on a daily basis, thanks to Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and all that, and Notch 6 and all those different forms of exposure. And so so I think that's why it's so important to get the social media aspect in there, because that's really how you're going to get new people into the hobby. There's 4 and 5-year-old, 6-year-old kids that just watch YouTube all day long and watch model trains all day long. And that's something that just wasn't there when I was a kid. And so it's so much easier for kids to get into the hobby on their own without any help from mom and dad. And that's the real value of it. And so that's why I try to really, I'm getting older, so I'm probably not as in on what's new as someone my son's age, but that's why I try to get into, beyond YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Ustream, and have all these and the live webcams, so that people in the hobby, and especially young kids and stuff, can really find a way to enjoy the hobby and get into it. And I think it's really going to pay off, not now, but I think it's going to pay off in probably, 15, 20 years from now, when the kids that were raised on the internet get to be my age, when they get to be mid-30s, 40s, and they have a family and they start to have some disposable income. That's when I think you're going to see the real fruits of what's happening now come to be. I think you're going to see all these kids that were raised on YouTube with families and jobs and disposable income really wanting to get back into the hobby and recapture what they saw when they were a kid on YouTube. You don't really get an immediate payoff, because, a 5 or 6 year old kid really doesn't have that much. They're dependent on their parent to buy stuff. But when that kid gets older and looks back and says, man, I really liked when I was 8 years old and I watched, Eric's trains on YouTube and all this stuff. And now I've got a nice job and I'm going to go to the store and get myself these trains I always wanted to get. Right. I think that's the power of it. And it's people like you and me and all the other people out there that are doing this stuff online that is really creating sort of this young movement of people that are really getting into the hobby. And I don't think it's really something anyone can even measure yet, because you can't measure it in sales, because obviously so many of these people are young. But in terms of the number of subscribers that I've got, the number of views that I've got, the number of emails and postcards and all the stuff that I get, I think there are so many young kids into the hobby that are really going to help the hobby sustain, for the next, X number of years.
Right.
So it's really great for that. And that's what I think the real beauty of the social media is. Yeah.
I like how you explain that, because I think you're right. I think we're doing the setup work now that's been missed for the last really 30 years or however long it's been, really since the early 70s.
Right.
And the reality is, the guys like us that are in our 30s, we're the exception, because somehow we got exposed, and for us to get back in our 30s, or in my case, it stuck around through part of high school and part of college too, to an extent. That's unusual. And I hear people talk about all the time how they're so concerned about, they don't see anybody young in the hobby. Well, the reason is they're just not ready yet. The seeds are there. And I think what you and I are doing is we are doing setup work now for, another 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
Exactly. You can't really measure it by going to a train show, because in order for a kid to make it to a train show, their parents have to take them,
That's true.
And not a lot of parents can do that, because they're working or whatever. But any kid can get on YouTube or on Notch 6 and listen to a show or watch a video, or get on Twitter or whatever. And it's such a wonderful tool for really any hobby, not just trains, for anything. If you're into some sort of niche hobby, you can connect in a way that you never could before. If your hobby is collecting, painted turtle shells, there's probably thousands of people out there on the internet that do the same thing. And 30 years ago, there was just no way to find those people, and now you can. And so that benefits everything, including the train hobby. There's just such a big opportunity for these kids to get exposed. It's really heartwarming. You have every year I have an open house in the fall. And, some of these kids come from across the country. I had a kid come from California.
Wow.
And it's just so heartwarming when they come in and they're like, "Mom, it's Eric's Trains, and they're so happy to see it. And that kid is just hooked on trains now. And I don't think that would happen 30 years ago in the 70s or 80s, because there would just be no way for that. It would be very difficult. Like I said, it would take their dad being into trains. And it's even more so, it's even more important nowadays because, back in the 1950s, divorce was not as big of a deal as it is now. These days, you have so many kids that are just being raised by a single parent, by mom.
Mm-hmm.
And 30 years ago, what single mom was going to have the ability to get her son into model trains?
Sure.
Probably not going to happen because she's working. Nowadays, even with a single mom, her kid, I get emails all the time from moms who say, "My son loves your videos. We watch your videos every night." It's really, and it really speaks to the power of the social media and how you can really influence these young kids and really get them into the hobby, and hopefully at the same time keep them out of trouble.
Sure. The hobby teaches so many skills that are so many practical skills. Electrical skills, so and granted, I may be a little bit of a different case, but, some of the electrical skills that I picked up learning model railroading when we bought our first house here, I felt comfortable enough with some of those basic electrical skills to do some basic rewiring on my house. And I know I picked that up from the model trains, and there's just so much there, and there's so much good that can be learned. It's just a matter of getting it out in front of these kids, and what you're doing is you're bringing it right to them in a way that's free and it's accessible 24/7, 365.
Right. And yeah, you're right. There is a lot of stuff, a lot of great characteristics, that the hobby can bring to a person. It teaches, you learn the electronics, you learn a little bit of physics, you learn a little bit of history, and above all, I think you learn patience, because you got to have patience in this hobby.
Yes.
And I think that's something that, you don't really learn from video games, and stuff like that. The one thing I've learned, that's the one big thing I've learned in this hobby over the years is patience. When I was a kid doing this hobby, I just wanted to get the track and everything installed as quick as I could, And nowadays, I've over the years, I've learned if you want to have it done right, you got to do it slowly and have some patience and just let it happen, and it's such an important thing for kids these days to learn, because they're really, the world moves so fast these days. It's really hard for a kid to learn patience.
Yeah, and they're basically told, do whatever makes you happy, and if it makes you happy, it's okay. And it's like, whoa, pump the brakes here for a second. Yeah. There are, and a lot of that starts at home, and we're not going to turn this into a parenting episode, but there's a lot of valuable skills here, and there's a lot of potential for parents and their kids to possibly bond over this hobby too. And it's been that way for a long time. And I think it's interesting the comment about the single parents getting in touch with you. And I've seen and read a lot of those comments on the YouTube videos, and I think that's really, really important, is that that the hobby as a whole recognizes that it's not just fathers and sons anymore. There's a lot of single moms out there who are trying to figure out, I've got a little boy, there's a mom out there who has a little boy that's absolutely nuts about trains, and they're trying to figure it out too. Mm-hmm. It's not just a one-sided, it's a dad thing anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it can totally be a mom thing. And the great thing about, the feedback that I've gotten on the videos, at least, is that the parents really like watching it with their kids, because it's enjoyable for the parents too, even for moms. They really enjoy it much more than watching, watching something on one, a kid's show on TV. Sure. That's based purely for kids, because, I've got a son, and I know every show on the Disney Channel and every show on, what was that channel that he watched when he was a kid? Noggin or whatever it is. Yeah. All these kids shows, and they really get annoying after a while. And as a parent, sometimes you just sort of have to put up with it. But I think a lot of these parents actually enjoy watching the videos with their kid, because it's enjoyable for kids, but it's enjoyable for an adult too. And even moms can get into it and really sit down and watch it with their son without going crazy because it's some, crazy kid show that is just flashing lights and stuff like that all over the place. So, so it's really neat to hear, get the feedback from people all over the place, and from all different walks of life. People that you wouldn't really expect to have parental support. All of a sudden, these kids have, these parents that really enjoy watching something that's that's wholesome and that's constructive for their kid. Mm-hmm. And so it's there's a lot of power there, and that's the real gratifying part of it. I just do the videos for fun and everything, but it's really gratifying when you have these parents write you or kids write you these really beautiful postcards or letters and stuff. And that's the nice payoff of it, is that you were able to, at least for a period of time, influence a kid in a good way.
Right. I want to spend some time here as we head into the back part of this interview, kind of talking about one of the things that you've gotten really, really good at and some notoriety on the past couple of years, and that's your product reviews. And that's where you're really starting to make a hallmark, and I think a lot of people are paying attention to what you're saying. When you review a new product such as an engine, what are some, key points about an engine that'll make it a winner for you, and what are things that are deal breakers for you right now when you're playing with these new products?
Well, I always try to be an optimist about things. One of the things that I say these all the time, I really don't like, I'm not a big fan of people who bring a lot of negativity into the hobby. And I can't stand it when I read people's posts, where they're just doing nothing but bad mouthing a model, because for me, if I want stress and aggravation and negativity, I'll just go upstairs and work, or I'll go sit in traffic, when it comes to the hobby, I like to have fun. And so even the worst models, or, I try to find the redeeming features, and it's always about setting expectations. I mean, if you pay $200 for a starter set, you're going to get what you pay for. And it's going to be a good starter set for $200, but it's not going to be, some super high quality piece of machinery or anything. But for me, I really like it, when I do a review on an engine or any model, I really like it when the manufacturer pushes the envelope a little bit, or gives you something that you really didn't expect. Just anything that's a little over what you expected. It's always really nice to find those things. Like I just did a review on the Lionel Trainmaster diesel, and it's a pretty ordinary diesel. But then when I was messing around with it, I found that it had these vents on the back that actually open and close. And that was really cool. I mean, I was like, they didn't have to do this, but they did. That's what I always like seeing, is something that they didn't have to do, but they did anyway. And so anytime I find something like that, that is a big plus. As far as the things that are deal breakers, really the main thing that, a lack of features, I don't really get upset about. A lack of detailing, I don't really get upset about. The only thing I really get upset about sometimes is a lack of functionality. If you get something and you can tell that it was not assembled with care. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like you get something and it's clear that they just threw this thing together, and if they had taken 30 more minutes to actually do a quality job assembling it, you'd have a good model on your hands. But, you can tell that they sort of rushed it. And so those are the things that usually aggravate me the most. But other than that, even that, I always try to see the silver lining in things,
Right.
And, you have to realize that, these, like we talked about before, we started, the train companies are in this to make money, and so usually when something is not what, is a little subpar or not what you quite expected, it's usually for monetary reasons. And so you sort of have to just take it in stride and say, well, it would be nice if it had this, but it's still a nice model. I still like running it, And that's the big thing for me. I mean, as long as it's a fun engine to run or a fun train to run, that's all I really care about in the end. I've got models that are very detailed, but they're not as fun to run as some models that are less detailed. So that's what does it for me. And other people are different. Some people, all they worry about are the details. That's all they care about, and that's fine. But
there's room for all of them in the hobby, whether you're a traditional guy, whether you're a scale detail guy.
Yeah.
And I've said this before on the show, there's room for it's it's a big house. There's room for everybody here.
Yeah. And I just, I just want everyone, it's there's room for everybody. And I wish, I want there to be mutual respect for everybody. Sometimes you get some of the scale guys looking down their nose at 3-rail. And, I get it, but at the same time, it's like, hey, it's to each his own, and if you like this, that's, who cares, I mean, 3-rails, O gauge, we have three rails on the track, which is crazy when you think about it.
And we're wrong right out of the gate.
Yeah. And it drives scale guys crazy when they look at that third rail, but I love it. I love having the third rail. And so it just depends on what you're looking for. But that's the great thing about the hobby, is there's something for everybody.
Right.
And, what I like might not be what you like, and that's fine. You just have to get what you like. And if you don't like something, just don't get it. It's always funny when people say, I'm always saying this in my review videos about the crew talk sounds, I'm always saying, if you don't like the crew talk sound, you don't have to use them, but there's so many people that don't like those crew talk sounds. And I'm fine with that. I understand that. But it's like, well, I like the crew talk sounds, and like, maybe I'm weird like that, but I like them. And other people like them. And I tell you, I mean, I've said this before, but, say what you want about the sound effects on O gauge engines. The reaction from kids when they come to see the layout and they hear the trains talk, I mean, they love it. I mean, they just light up, and adults too. I mean, they're not expecting it when they come down and they're new to the hobby, and all of a sudden the train is talking. I mean, they love it, and so I think everything has value, whether it's a third rail or a talking train or super detail, prototypical detail. Everything has value to somebody, and that's the wonderful thing about the hobby.
Right.
Right.
I'm going to ask you an opinion-based question, although I think you're probably one of the best sources to go to, even though we're about a third of the way through 2015. Tell me what product left the biggest impression on you for 2014?
Well, I mean, the first one out of the gate, obviously, is the big boy, the Vision Line Big Boy. That was, and I think, that's probably, I think that's probably going to be most people's answer, because I think Lionel really outdid themselves on the Vision Line Big Boy. So that's probably the number one train of 2014 as far as I'm concerned. But there were lots of other nice ones too.
Was there a dark horse for you, something that you didn't think too much about when you ordered it, but it showed up and you're like, wow, I didn't expect that?
Yeah. You know what I really liked? The engine that I was really happy about last year, other than the big boy, was the Southern Pacific cab forward.
Okay.
And I think I've said this in a couple of videos, but what I really liked about it was not so much the model itself, because they've done the cab forward before. But I was really happy that they brought back the whistle steam smoke.
Yep.
And I believe that was the first model they put out that had the smoking whistle again. Because they were doing the smoking whistle a few years ago, and then they stopped doing it. And I was really unhappy about that. And again, I know they had their reasons, but I guess they got enough feedback from people that they finally decided to bring it back. And the cab forward was the first one that had it. And so it was a really great day when that cab forward arrived. I think it was around September or something like that of 2014. And it was a great day when I took that thing out of the box and blew the whistle and saw that smoke shooting out. I was like, this is the way it needs to be. Because
isn't it crazy how much fun that feature adds to an engine?
It's amazing. I mean, I'll have engines on my shelves, and I will make decisions on what to pull down sometimes based on that feature. I'll be like, well, I really like this Mohawk, but this engine has the smoking whistle, so I'm going to run that, because it's such a cool feature. It brings so much to the experience, just like the swinging bell. And I'm really hopeful that in the next Vision Line engine they'll bring back the swinging bell, because they haven't done a swinging bell in several years. I think the last time they did the swinging bell was a Vision Line engine.
I think it was the Hudson.
Yeah,
I think that was the last time we've seen that.
And again, the swinging bell. I mean, when you combine the swinging bell with the smoking whistle, you've really got something. I mean, like I said, when I have the open house and people come and they see that Hudson with the swinging bell and the smoking whistle, they're blown away. I mean, they can't believe that the little bell is moving.
Yeah.
And not just moving, but moving in time with the bell noise. And so, like I said, when that cab forward arrived and I saw that smoking whistle in there again, I was really, really happy about that. And then, after that, the 765 showed up, which, again, that was a beautiful engine, too. I think that was one of the best of 2014 as well.
Yeah, I can actually agree with that one, because I actually bought that one.
That's a fantastic engine.
It really is. And with this whole new build to order thing, you've got to make your decisions sooner rather than later.
Uh-huh.
But, it's the payoff on that one was nice. It's an impressive engine. And like I said, if folks get a chance to pick one up on the secondary market, I encourage it. It's going to be interesting to watch what the secondary market does now that build to order's been around for a couple of years, and see how quick things start to filter out now. And you and I were talking about that with some of the earlier Vision Line pieces, how how some of the ones that weren't necessarily, all-stars out of the gate have suddenly become really scarce and are commanding some pretty impressive prices now.
Mm-hmm. I think the build to order will probably help collector value. For me personally, I really don't care about collector value because I get these things to operate and
Right.
to collect. I mean, like I've always told people, if you want to invest in something, buy gold, don't buy trains.
Right.
But it's nice that the value goes up. But in terms of people being able to get one, I like the value to stay at an affordable level. And so. I think the build to order is going to there's some good things about it and there's some not so good things about it. And again, like we were talking about before we started, some people have criticized the build to order because they say, oh, now I won't be able to get my blowout discount train. And I tell them, I say, well, the build to order may not be great for your wallet, but it's good for Lionel's wallet.
Yeah.
Because while it's great for you to be able to get a train at a blowout price means that it's sitting in a warehouse unsold and they're trying to get rid of it, which is never a good thing, from a business point of view. And so I would rather, for me, even though it might make the engines a little harder to come by on the secondary market, I would rather have that than to see Lionel sitting with unsold product, and mounting debts.
I'm going to wrap it up on this question because you and I could talk forever. And, well, of course, we'll be back with you again at some point. But I want to wrap it up on, if you could impart one piece of advice to somebody who's getting started into the hobby and you deal with these folks on a weekly basis,
mm-hmm.
What's that one piece of advice to somebody getting started?
Oh, gosh. My advice would be to start small and just go from there. You don't have to, and you hear this all the time, but, from layout builders, but you don't have to tackle a big layout all at once. I didn't. It took me 3 layouts before I got something like this. So I would say start small, get a few things that you really like, and start with a small layout where you can really start working on your skills. And above all, I guess the main ingredient for someone who's just getting into the hobby is to get a lot of educational materials. There's a lot of instructional DVDs out there, a lot of instructional videos, some of them that I've done. There's a lot of instructional books out there. And so I would recommend getting your hands on as much learning material as you can. Start small, start with a small layout, get a bunch of learning material, DVDs, books, magazines, online videos, stuff like that, and then just build your knowledge and use that small layout as sort of your first canvas of sort of to practice these things that you're learning, and then just go from there. So once you've once you've got a 4x8 or an 8x8 layout, work on some techniques there. Find what you want to do, because what I do is not for everybody. Some people just like trains running around track on a piece of plywood, and that's great, So I would say just jump in small and then go from there. And above all, get some learning materials, read a book, read a magazine, watch a DVD, and that will really help you start getting ideas for what you want to do.
You've been listening to Eric Siegel with ericstrains.com. Eric, there are so many different ways that people can get in touch with you and see what you're doing.
Oh, yeah.
Rattle off all the channels here that people can connect with you through.
Well, there's ericstrains.com, which is sort of the home base of what I do. And then from there you can go to the other outlets. There's the YouTube channel, which you can get to from my webpage. There's Facebook, which is a really important tool that I use. There's Twitter. There's every now and then I'll do a live video show on Ustream. And then I've also got the live webcams. And all of those things can be accessed from my Eric's Trains website. one of the things that, a lot of people who watch my videos, they'll email and say, when's the next layout update, or when's the next video coming out? And what I usually tell them is, if you want to find out what's going on like a day-to-day basis, check out my Facebook page, because I post there not every day, but several times a week. And so if you're curious about what's going on, what I'm working on, what the next video is going to be, Facebook is the best place to do that. And there's lots of great people that are on my Facebook page, and we have lots of great discussions of stuff. And so I would probably say that's the number one place to get to figure out what's going on with Eric's Trains, other than the Eric's Trains website. But I would say even more, Facebook is probably the best place to find out everything that's going on.
Eric, it's been great to talk to you. It's taken far too long, but I'm glad we were finally able to connect, and we are definitely going to catch up again down the road, my friend.
That's great.
Thanks for listening to Notch 6, the only podcast dedicated to O-gauge trains. You can find every episode on our website, notch6.com, or on iTunes and Stitcher. We'll see you again soon. Until then, be sure to keep it in Notch 6. The following has been a production of Notch 6 Media and is intended for private use only. This show may not be copied or redistributed without express written consent. This show copyright 2015, all rights reserved.